Before we dive into this incredible story of unexpected connections, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful narratives to life. A billionaire tech mogul, consumed by his empire, stumbled upon a hotel attendant cradling his crying toddler like her own. What unfolded next shattered his world and rebuilt it, piece by piece. Ethan Vance hadn't planned on a prolonged stay. Business had brought him to Seattle, high-stakes meetings with Asian investors, a critical board retreat, and a keynote address at a downtown tech summit. But in his world, plans were fluid, often shifting with the unpredictable currents of global finance. Now, nearly 3 weeks into what was meant to be a fleeting visit, he still occupied the presidential suite at the Emerald Grand, one of the city's most prestigious hotels, his 18-month-old son, Jasper, in tow. Jasper was too young to grasp why their walls weren't their own. He couldn't comprehend that his father, a titan of industry, CEO of one of the nation's most powerful tech firms, was a man quietly coming undone. Since the sudden death of his wife, Ethan had been parenting in fragments, snatched moments between transatlantic flights, hurried phone calls, and polished boardroom presentations. He had meticulously structured his grief into tight schedules and pre-approved answers, transforming pain into relentless productivity. But Jasper, a mere baby, cared nothing for systems. He only knew that his father's arms often felt too busy, his eyes too distant. That morning, the suite was eerily quiet. Ethan was hunched over his desk, immersed in a call with European partners, while Jasper sat on the king-sized bed behind him, a fortress of pillows and scattered toys. The boy had been fussy since waking, rubbing his eyes, emitting soft, discontented sounds that Ethan tried to tune out. He'd glance over his shoulder, offering quick, hollow reassurances. "It's okay, buddy. Daddy's almost done," but never truly turning around. Then came the cry. Not a whimper, not a complaint, but a sharp, terrified wail that sliced through Ethan's concentration like glass shattering on marble. He dropped his phone, the call still connected, and spun around, heart hammering against his ribs. The bed was empty. Panic surged through his body like an electric shock. He bellowed Jasper's name, rushed towards the bathroom, then back into the suite's hallway. That's when he saw it. The open door, just outside, near the service cart. A hotel attendant was kneeling on the plush carpet, Jasper nestled in her arms. She looked impossibly calm. Her dark hair was neatly tied at the nape of her neck, and she wore the crisp black and white uniform of the hotel staff. Her hazel eyes, clear and steady, were focused entirely on the child she held. Jasper was no longer crying. In fact, he had gone limp against her chest, his cheek pressed into her shoulder, his small fingers curled into the fabric of her uniform. For a moment, Ethan could only stand there, frozen. The scene before him was almost surreal. His son, soothed in seconds by a stranger in a way Ethan hadn't managed all morning. Anger rose instinctively, protective and sharp. "What are you doing?" His voice came out louder than intended. The attendant looked up. She didn't flinch, didn't look guilty or afraid. She simply held his gaze and said, "He was alone, on the floor. He was scared." Ethan stepped closer, scanning Jasper for any injuries. "You shouldn't be touching him. You're not family." "I know," she said quietly, but he needed someone. The way she said it, without apology, without drama, unsettled Ethan, more than if she had begged forgiveness. She wasn't trying to insert herself. She wasn't trying to make a scene. She had simply been there, present, attentive. When he hadn't, Jasper stirred slightly, let out a soft sigh, and burrowed closer to her. His tiny hand, still gripping the edge of her apron, made something in Ethan's chest twist painfully. The sight brought back memories he tried not to touch, his wife holding Jasper, the effortless gentleness she carried, the quiet magic of a mother's arms. Ethan wanted to snatch his son, to retreat, to erase the shame blooming in his gut. Instead, he said nothing. He just nodded once tightly, and the attendant, still holding Jasper, slowly stood. "I'm sorry," she said, her tone sincere but composed. "I didn't mean to overstep." "You didn't," Ethan muttered, even though part of him still wanted to believe she had. "Just thank you." She gave a small nod and carefully passed the sleeping child into his arms. Jasper stirred again, but didn't wake. Ethan held him close, trying to recreate the comfort the attendant had so effortlessly provided. As she turned to leave, he realized he didn't even know her name. And yet, in less than 5 minutes, she had done something that money, assistants, and entire teams of professionals couldn't. She had calmed his son when he needed it most, and Ethan wasn't sure if that made him grateful or terrified. Ethan didn't sleep that night. Even after Jasper drifted off in his crib beside the bed, peaceful and unaware of the storm inside his father, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling, haunted by the image of the hotel attendant holding his son. Not because it was wrong or threatening, but because it had felt, in some terrifying and inexplicable way, right. He kept replaying it over and over again, her stillness, the calm in her eyes, the way Jasper had surrendered to her without resistance, the trust in his tiny body as it melted into her shoulder. It wasn't that Ethan hadn't held his son. He did. Often. But never like that. Never with the ease she had. There was something maternal in the way she touched him, something steady and instinctual, as if she had known Jasper far longer than just a few seconds. And that was what unsettled Ethan most. It shouldn't have taken a stranger to calm his child. It should have been him. He was the father. He was the one who stayed behind when the world fell apart. He was the one building a future around the wreckage of loss. The next morning, while Jasper napped in the stroller during their walk, Ethan went to the front desk of the hotel. He asked, without quite knowing how to phrase it, if he could get the name of the attendant who had been assigned to his suite the previous morning. The concierge looked puzzled, even slightly uncomfortable, and asked if there had been a complaint. Ethan shook his head. "No, nothing like that. I just want to thank her." It was only half the truth. Eventually, with a little persistence and a discreet call to housekeeping, they gave him her name. Serena Hayes, room attendant, employed by the hotel for almost 2 years. No infractions, no disciplinary notes. A model employee, they said. Ethan found her during her shift later that day. She was cleaning a hallway on the 10th floor, far from the luxury suites, replacing linens from the laundry cart and humming softly to herself. She didn't see him at first, and he took a second to watch her work. There was something precise and quiet about the way she moved. No wasted motion, no resentment in her posture. When she finally noticed him standing there, she straightened instinctively, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Mr. Vance?" she said, her voice polite but guarded. "Is everything okay with your room?" He shook his head. "No complaints. I'm not here about that. I wanted to say thank you for yesterday." Her expression softened just slightly. "You don't have to, really." "I do," he said. "You didn't have to help, but you did. And Jasper, he hasn't calmed down that quickly in weeks." She looked away for a second, as if uncertain what to do with the compliment. "I just did what anyone would do." "That's not true," Ethan replied. "Most people wouldn't have done anything. Most people would have waited, or walked past, or asked for permission. You didn't." Serena let out a small breath. "He reminded me of someone." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Your son?" "No," she said, looking directly at him now. "Me, when I was little. Left alone, in unfamiliar places. I remember what that feels like. Ethan didn't know how to respond. He hadn't expected honesty. Not like that. Not something that cut so cleanly through his assumptions. He looked at her more closely. She was young, maybe mid-20s, but there was something older in her gaze. Experience that had nothing to do with time. "I don't mean to pry," he said carefully, "but can I ask, do you work full-time here?" She gave a short nod. "Sometimes double shifts. I'm saving up for school. Early childhood education, maybe. Haven't decided yet." "Do you work with kids now?" "No, but I used to babysit, and I volunteer at a community center when I can." Ethan hesitated. "You're good with them," she shrugged. "Kids don't want perfection. They want to feel safe." That line sat with him for a long moment. It echoed something he'd heard before, only this time, it came not from a therapist charging him hundreds per hour, but from a woman folding bed sheets in a quiet hallway. He wanted to ask more. He wanted to know where she came from, how she'd gotten here, what else she carried behind that quiet presence. But something in her posture told him not to push. Instead, he said, "If you're ever free, maybe you could, I don't know, visit Jasper. You clearly made an impression on him." She looked surprised, cautious. "I'm not a nanny or a childcare worker." "I know," he said. "I'm not hiring you. I'm just asking if you'd like to see him again." Serena's answer didn't come right away. She looked down at the towel in her hands, then back up. "Let me think about it." He nodded and turned to go, but she stopped him just as he reached the end of the hallway. "Mr. Vance?" He looked over his shoulder. "I'm not trying to be part of your world," she said. "I don't belong in it." Ethan gave a half smile. "I don't think I do either anymore." Then he left, carrying with him a feeling he hadn't expected, one that was neither professional nor strategic. It was something deeply human, vulnerable. Like maybe, for the first time in a long time, he was walking towards something real. What would you have done if you were Ethan? Would you have pursued this unexpected connection, or kept your distance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Ethan found himself thinking about Serena more often than he liked to admit. It wasn't romantic, not yet, not really. It was something quieter and more difficult to define. There was a stillness about her that unsettled him, not because it was cold, but because it was honest. She didn't try to impress him. She didn't try to charm. She was the first person in a long time who didn't seem to care that he was a billionaire or a CEO. And that unfamiliar lack of pretense unnerved him in a strangely comforting way. Days passed, and Serena didn't come by the suite. Ethan didn't ask the hotel to send her, didn't make requests or excuses. But each morning, he half expected to hear a knock at the door or catch a glimpse of her cart rolling down the hall. Jasper, unaware of any expectations, continued to be his usual mixture of joy and frustration. He'd begun saying simple words, up, ball, da, and had recently taken to crawling toward the suite door whenever he heard voices outside. One morning, he stopped at the door and simply sat there for several minutes, watching the shadows move beneath the gap. When Ethan tried to pick him up, the boy resisted, eyes still fixed on the hallway, as if waiting for something or someone. On the fourth morning, Ethan caught sight of her. She was pushing her cart down the corridor near the service elevators, her head down, earbuds in, completely absorbed in her routine. He hesitated, unsure if he should interrupt. But something pulled at him, something beyond convenience or politeness. He walked over and said her name quietly. She looked up, surprised but not startled. "I was hoping we could talk," he said. Serena nodded and led him to a quiet corner behind the laundry chute, away from cameras, away from curious eyes. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and fresh linen. It was narrow, dimly lit, and almost oddly peaceful. "I'm not checking up on you," Ethan said. "I just wanted to, I don't know. Talk. Serena leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Eyes patient. You don't need to explain. He hesitated. Actually, I think I do. I keep replaying what happened that day. The way you held Jasper. It made me realize something. She waited. I don't know how to comfort him, he admitted. Not like that. Not like you did. I try. God, I try, but there's something missing. Serena's gaze softened, but she didn't rush to fill the silence. She let him sit with his own discomfort. You know, she finally said, when I was a kid, I used to cry in the middle of the night. I'd hope someone would come. Usually no one did. Sometimes a social worker would check in. But they always left again. Eventually, I learned to be quiet. Ethan didn't know why, but her words hit harder than he expected. He had never known that kind of emptiness. Not personally, but he'd seen it in the eyes of others. He'd seen it in Jasper's too sometimes. And that day, she continued, when I saw your son crying, it wasn't about doing the right thing. It was instinct. I saw a child alone, and I knew what that felt like. Ethan exhaled. You say it so simply, but it meant everything. Serena looked at him for a long time before replying. It's not hard to offer kindness. What's hard is believing it'll matter. They stood there, surrounded by the hum of machines and the scent of clean cotton. Both of them suspended in the strange quiet that only truth can create. He wanted to ask her 1,000 things about her past, about what she dreamed of, about what kept her going. But he didn't want to pry. He didn't want to turn her into a project or a story he could control. I'm not trying to fix you, he said, or Jasper, or anything, really. Serena smiled, just a little. That's good. I don't need fixing. I just need a place I don't have to run from. Ethan nodded. Do you think that place could be near us? Around us, even? She tilted her head, curious. Are you offering me a job? No, not a job, he said quietly. Just a presence. I don't even know what to call it. You make him feel safe. You make me feel like maybe I'm not as lost as I think I am. For a moment, the hallway felt like a pause in time. Two people, damaged in different ways, standing in the middle of something fragile and unnamed. Serena finally replied, her voice steady. I'll think about it. Not because I owe you anything, but because he smiled at me like he knew me, and I haven't felt known in a long time. They parted without promises, but something had shifted. Something small, but real. Ethan walked back to the suite and found Jasper napping in a beam of sunlight on the floor, clutching a soft blue blanket to his chest. And for the first time in weeks, Ethan sat beside him without checking his phone, without rushing to answer an email or schedule a meeting. He just sat there, breathing slowly, letting the quiet wrap around him like something sacred. Because maybe, just maybe, healing didn't arrive in grand gestures or clean resolutions. Maybe it started in the hallway behind a laundry chute, with two people admitting they were tired of surviving alone. The days that followed settled into a rhythm Ethan hadn't anticipated, one that felt quiet, but unfamiliar, as if he were walking through someone else's life, trying it on for size. Serena didn't immediately become part of his and Jasper's world. She didn't suddenly appear every day or fill his suite with warmth and conversation. Instead, things unfolded slowly, organically, the way a door creaks open rather than swings wide. It started with short visits. Serena would stop by during her break, always tentative, always asking if it was a good time. Jasper would light up the moment he saw her, his tiny hands reaching out instinctively, his voice bubbling with the early sounds of affection. "Reina," he would say, the word not fully formed, but clearly meant for her. It melted something in Ethan every time he heard it. She would sit with him on the floor, letting him stack blocks or babble nonsense stories, while she listened like it was the most important conversation in the world. She had that rare quality, true, patient presence. It didn't ask for attention. It simply offered it. Ethan watched these moments from a short distance at first, leaning against a doorframe or sipping his coffee in silence. He wasn't sure how to participate. It wasn't just about being an outsider to the dynamic forming between Serena and Jasper. It was about confronting how disconnected he had become from his own role as a father. It wasn't that he didn't love his son. He did. Fiercely. But love, he was learning, wasn't always enough when it lived only in intention. Children needed love they could feel, touch, hear, trust. And Ethan was still learning how to give it in ways that didn't rely on providing things or solving problems. One evening, after Serena had left, Ethan sat in the dimly lit living room, Jasper asleep in the crib beside him. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like it echoed. He glanced around at the expensive furniture, the untouched wine on the tray, the sleek walls of a luxury suite that now felt more like a temporary hiding place than a home. He opened his laptop, intending to dive into work, but paused instead. He opened a new document, and without fully knowing why, he began typing. He wrote about loss, about how the silence after his wife's funeral had been louder than any grief he'd expected, about the confusion of holding a newborn while drowning in boardroom schedules, about his guilt, his failures, his isolation. He wrote about Jasper crying and not knowing how to hold him properly. He wrote about Serena, about how one act of instinctual kindness had upended everything he thought he understood about strength. The words poured out like they'd been waiting too long for permission. The next day, he didn't mention the writing. He didn't know if he ever would. But he started to speak differently, to himself, to Jasper, even to Serena. One afternoon, while they sat together on the floor watching Jasper try to wedge a rubber duck between the couch cushions, Ethan turned to Serena and asked, not casually but sincerely, "Do you think I'm failing him?" Serena didn't answer right away. She looked at him the way she always did, steadily, like she wasn't afraid of the question. "No," she said. "I think you're learning in real time, and I think that's one of the hardest things a parent can do." He nodded, grateful but not fully reassured. "I keep wondering if he'll grow up and feel like I was absent, like I didn't try hard enough." She leaned back slightly, her voice calm. "Trying isn't about perfection. It's about showing up. And you're here. That counts for more than you think." They fell into silence again. But it was easier now. More breathable. What surprised Ethan most was how quickly he started to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Stability. Not just in the routines with Jasper, but in his own body. He began to take deeper breaths. He began to step away from work calls without panic. He began to laugh more, really laugh. Not the polite chuckle of business meetings, but the kind that came from the stomach, sometimes unexpected, sometimes at his own expense. One afternoon, Jasper tried to put a slice of banana into Ethan's shoe, and then looked up proudly, as if he'd just completed a genius prank. Serena burst into laughter before Ethan did, her face lighting up so brightly it seemed to cast warmth across the entire suite. Ethan looked at her then, not as an attendant, not as a guest in his world, but as someone who had stepped into a space where she had never been invited and made it feel more like home than anything he had built on purpose. That night, Ethan stood beside Jasper's crib and watched him sleep. One tiny hand clutching the corner of his blanket, his chest rising and falling with a peace that Ethan hadn't been able to give him alone. He whispered something to himself then, words that he hadn't said aloud before. "I don't want to do this without her." It wasn't a confession. It was a realization. one that would carry him into the coming days with both fear and hope. Because allowing someone in, truly in, meant letting go of control. And for a man who had built his entire identity around holding everything together, that was both the most terrifying and the most necessary thing he could do. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything started to unravel. The air in the hotel was unusually tense, the kind of quiet that hinted something was about to shift. Ethan had taken Jasper down to the garden courtyard for some fresh air, giving Serena a rare break. They had started to find balance, a rhythm of sorts, one that felt safe, steady, even hopeful. That rhythm shattered with a single photograph. Someone, a guest from one of the adjacent suites, had taken a picture of Serena holding Jasper on one of the upper balconies. It had been innocent, sweet even, a candid moment where the boy had reached for her and she, instinctively, picked him up. The moment had lasted maybe a minute, but the photograph had captured something that the world, especially the media, loved to distort. Within hours, the image made its way to a low-level gossip site under the headline, "Mystery Maid Cradles CEO's Son. Where is the father?" Within another day, it was everywhere. Blog posts, hotel forums, clickbait articles. The image was cropped, filtered, and manipulated into a dozen different versions, each more salacious than the last. By Wednesday, hotel management called Ethan into a private meeting. They were nervous, formal, and clearly trying to protect the brand. The head of PR used phrases like optics and potential liability. The general manager danced around the issue but finally said what they were all thinking. Serena needed to be removed from the floor. Just until the situation dies down, they added quickly, as if that softened the blow. Ethan didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply stood, left the meeting, and found Serena. She was in the service corridor near the laundry chute again, folding towels with the same calm precision she always carried. But this time, her shoulders were drawn, her expression guarded. She had already heard. "I'm suspended," she said before he could speak. Her tone was flat, but her eyes betrayed her. "They said they're reviewing the situation, that it's not permanent, but we both know how this goes." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, tension building behind his eyes like a pressure valve about to blow. "This is my fault. I should have protected you better." Serena shook her head. "No, Ethan. This isn't about you. It's not even about Jasper. This is what happens when someone like me is seen holding the child of someone like you. It's not new, it's just exposed now." He looked at her, really looked at her, and felt an anger he hadn't known he was capable of. Not at her, not at himself, but at the world they both lived in, the one that judged people by their uniforms, by their tax brackets, by the shape of the name tags on their chest. He had built his empire thinking he could control everything, but he couldn't control this. He couldn't protect Serena from being reduced to a headline, and it was killing him. "They're not going to reinstate you," he said quietly, "even if they pretend to consider it." "I know," she replied, folding one last towel with sharp corners. "I've already packed up my locker." He didn't know what to say after that. Words felt useless. He watched her gather her things, watched her dignity stay intact, even as her job was ripped from her, and something inside him finally snapped. That night, Ethan did what no one expected. He called a reporter, not one from the tabloids, but someone with integrity, someone who'd covered him before in the business world. And he told her the truth. Not the PR version, not the damage control narrative. The truth. He told her about his wife, about the weight of single fatherhood, about how he'd failed to be fully present in his son's earliest months. He told her about Serena, about the moment she found Jasper on the floor, crying, and how she didn't hesitate. He talked about how she showed more humanity in a hallway than most executives showed in a lifetime of boardrooms. "I didn't hire her to save my son," he said in the interview. "She just did, and I didn't ask her to stay. But she did, when no one else could reach him. Or me." The article went live the next morning, and everything changed. For better or worse, the world now saw Serena not as a threat or a scandal, but as a person. Some people supported her, others criticized Ethan for blurring boundaries, but the majority were moved. Something in the honesty of his voice struck a chord. Offers poured in, for both of them. Job offers, sponsorships, even a book deal. But Ethan declined them all. He wasn't interested in monetizing vulnerability. What he cared about now was something smaller and infinitely more important: stability, truth, and a right to build a future without shame or permission. He found Serena sitting on a bench outside the hotel later that week. She looked up as he approached, uncertainty flickering in her expression. "Why'd you do it?" she asked. He sat beside her, careful not to break the fragile space between them. "Because I was tired of hiding behind silence, and because the world deserves to know who you really are." She laughed once, dry and soft. "I'm nobody, Ethan. Just a girl who folded towels and picked up a crying baby." "No," he said, turning to her fully. "You're the reason my son knows what comfort feels like. That makes you everything." For the first time since the scandal broke, Serena let herself lean into something close to relief. And though nothing had been fixed overnight, and the road ahead was still complicated, one thing was clear. They were walking it together now. Not because of guilt or obligation, but because, somewhere between grief and chaos, a child had reached for her, and she had stayed. Do you believe Ethan made the right choice by speaking out? What would you have done in his shoes? Share your perspective in the comments. In the weeks that followed the interview, Ethan's world shifted in ways he hadn't expected, and in many ways, couldn't control. Public opinion moved like a tide. Some of it was supportive, empathetic even. Parents reached out with stories of their own losses, their own regrets, and their gratitude to the people who had shown up for their children when they couldn't. But not everyone was kind. There were critics, skeptics, trolls who questioned his judgment, his leadership, his credibility as both a father and a CEO. The media picked apart his words, his body language, even the tone in which he had mentioned Serena. Every moment of sincerity became a soundbite, and every soundbite became fodder for endless opinion pieces. The company board called an emergency meeting. Several investors were spooked, and one major partner threatened to pull out of a crucial merger unless Ethan distanced himself publicly from the controversy. For years, Ethan had been the golden boy of the tech world, disciplined, controlled, untouchable. Now, that image was cracking. They didn't say it outright, but the message was clear. Step aside or we'll force your hand. Ethan didn't fight it. Not this time. He walked into the boardroom, sat through their carefully worded concerns, and signed the resignation papers without anger. He looked around the room of power-hardened faces and felt not shame, but relief. These were people he had built with, grown with, led, but none of them had ever really known him. They had known the numbers, the brand, the myth, but not the man. That night, he didn't go back to the penthouse suite. He didn't call his lawyers or try to fix anything. He took Jasper, bundled him in a jacket, and drove to the edge of the city where Serena now lived. An old converted row house that smelled faintly of wood polish and something warm baking in the oven. When she opened the door, surprised but not alarmed, he just stood there for a moment, not speaking. "I left the company," he said finally, voice quiet. Serena blinked. "You what?" "I resigned. The board wanted me out. I let them have it." Her expression didn't immediately change. She studied him for a moment, her eyes scanning for something behind the words. "Why are you here?" "Because I'm tired of running an empire that keeps me from the only thing I care about." He shifted Jasper in his arms and added, "And because I don't know what comes next, but I want to figure it out, not alone." She stepped aside and let them in. The weeks that followed were nothing like the life Ethan had known. There were no morning briefings, no corporate flights, no 10-figure negotiations. Instead, there were shared grocery lists, mismatched coffee mugs, and late nights sitting on a worn couch, watching Jasper learn new words and stumble through his first unsteady steps. Ethan learned how to cook without burning everything. He learned to fold baby clothes with only minor frustration. He learned to exist without being important. And Serena, she changed too. Slowly, cautiously, but undeniably. She no longer walked like she was apologizing for taking up space. She started laughing more, laughing louder, until her laughter filled the small rooms of their modest life. She enrolled in a certification program for early childhood development and spent her mornings volunteering at the local daycare, where children gravitated to her the way Jasper always had. People began to recognize her, not from headlines, but from kindness. One evening, after putting Jasper to sleep, they sat on the floor of the living room, backs against the couch, a quiet radio humming in the background. The lights were dim, the air smelled faintly of vanilla, and there was a peace between them that neither dared to name too quickly. "Do you miss it?" Serena asked, not looking at him. "The company?" She nodded. He thought for a long moment. "Sometimes. The clarity, the purpose. But I don't miss who I had to be in order to keep it. I was constantly chasing something I couldn't hold. I'd come home and feel like a stranger to my own son." Serena's voice was soft but steady. "And now, he said, "I feel like I'm finally showing up. Not just for him. For myself, too." She didn't respond right away. Then she whispered, "You're not the only one who needed this second chance." Ethan looked at her then, not like a man who had something to prove, but like someone who had finally learned how to see. She met his gaze and didn't look away. There was no grand declaration, no sudden romantic gesture. Just the mutual understanding of two people who had found shelter in each other after weathering too many storms alone. Later that night, as Jasper stirred briefly in his sleep and then settled again, Ethan stood by the doorway of the nursery, watching his son breathe steadily under the soft nightlight. Serena joined him, her hand brushing lightly against his. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. It wasn't the life Ethan had imagined. It wasn't polished or glamorous. It was hard and raw and full of uncertainty, but it was honest. And in its quiet truth, it felt more like home than anything he had ever built from the ground up. Spring came slowly, as if unsure whether it was welcome. The city thawed beneath a reluctant sun, and with it, something inside Ethan began to soften as well. The small house they now shared with Serena had no grand view, no staff, no marble countertops or custom furniture. But it had light, real, golden light that filtered through the windows in the morning and warmed the hardwood floors. It had laughter too, and music sometimes, and the sound of Jasper running down the hallway with a stuffed bear nearly as big as he was. There was a kind of rhythm to their life now, one that wasn't controlled by spreadsheets or investor reports, but by grocery runs, nap schedules, and the delicate balance of sharing space with someone who was slowly becoming something more than just a presence. Serena had started working part-time at the neighborhood daycare center, where her gentle, grounded energy was something the children responded to almost immediately. She came home with paint on her clothes and crayon drawings in her pockets, often too tired to talk, but always full of a quiet pride she didn't yet know how to name. Ethan had begun freelancing, consulting on projects he cared about, helping small startups find their footing, writing essays about leadership that no longer hid behind buzzwords. It wasn't about rebuilding a reputation. It was about offering something useful without losing himself again. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan took Jasper to the park, while Serena stayed behind to rest. It was a warm, breezy day, and the small playground was filled with children and their parents. Jasper, now talking in short, clear sentences, clutched Ethan's hand as they walked to the sandbox, already babbling excitedly about digging treasure. As he played, Ethan sat on a nearby bench, watching. A woman beside him glanced over and smiled. "He's yours?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "He's happy," she said simply, then added, "It shows." Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, and the house filled with the smell of roasted vegetables and garlic, Jasper sat at the kitchen table with his favorite picture book. Serena was on the couch, her hair pulled up messily, reading through an early education textbook with a highlighter in hand. Ethan was washing dishes, half listening to Jasper's chatter, half watching the way Serena absently chewed the tip of the highlighter cap when she was deep in thought. Jasper turned suddenly, slid off his chair, and padded over to Serena. He held the book out to her, and she set her notes aside immediately. He climbed into her lap and looked at her with that earnest, open look children have when they ask questions too big for their own understanding. "Are you my mommy now?" he asked, his voice so soft it barely reached Ethan over the sound of the running water. Serena didn't answer right away. Her arms instinctively wrapped around him, holding him close. Her breath caught slightly, but she didn't flinch. She looked at Ethan, who stood frozen, dish towel in hand, his eyes wide, not in fear, but in something closer to awe. She looked back at Jasper and said gently, "Would you like me to be?" Jasper nodded against her chest. "I like when you hold me." She smiled, kissed the top of his head, and whispered, "Then I'll hold you for as long as you need." Ethan didn't speak. He didn't move. But something inside him, something long locked away, opened in that moment, not with drama or noise, but with a silent, irrevocable certainty. Serena wasn't just someone who had stepped in. She had stayed. She had chosen not only Jasper, but him, in the quiet, consistent way she lived every part of her life. After Jasper fell asleep that night, they stood by his door, watching him breathe. Serena reached for Ethan's hand, and he took it without hesitation. They didn't talk about what the question meant, or what the answer had changed. It was already understood. They didn't need titles or labels. They didn't need to define the edges of what they had built. It was something deeper, something earned through shared nights, early mornings, and the space between grief and hope. In a world obsessed with speed and clarity, they had chosen to build something slow, something true. And though none of them said it aloud, they all knew. This wasn't a temporary arrangement. It wasn't just healing. It was home. Winter returned almost without warning, slipping into the edges of their lives with cold air under door frames and a soft blanket of frost on the windows each morning. It was their second December in the house, small, imperfect, but wholly theirs, and everything about this winter felt different than the last. The chaos had quieted, the fear had lessened, and though nothing had become perfect, everything had found a kind of peace. The days were no longer built around surviving, but around living, around each other. Jasper had grown into a confident, curious little boy, now talking in full sentences, asking endless questions, and reciting entire pages of his favorite books from memory. He had a habit of running into their bedroom early each morning, announcing the weather as if he were the weatherman of their little world. "It snowed again," he said one morning, climbing into their bed, cheeks flushed and eyes wide. "Can we have pancakes and a snowman?" Ethan smiled, pulling him close under the blanket. Across the bed, Serena yawned and reached for Jasper, her hand gently smoothing his messy hair. The three of them lay there for a while, listening to the wind outside and the muffled sounds of the city waking up beneath a layer of snow. It wasn't a grand life, not in the way Ethan's old one had been, but it was a full one, and it felt more meaningful than any power or position he'd ever held. Serena had officially finished her certification and was now working full-time at the daycare, where her ability to connect with children had earned her both respect and love. Ethan, after much hesitation, had begun speaking again, this time not in business conferences or tech summits, but at community centers and parenting forums. He spoke about rebuilding after loss, about fatherhood, about failing and trying again. His talks weren't polished. They weren't designed for applause. But people listened because they could tell he wasn't selling anything anymore. He was simply telling the truth. The Hayes Family Center, an early education and family support center named in quiet tribute to Serena's late mother, had just opened in the neighborhood. It had been Ethan's idea, a way to build something lasting, something that reflected the values they had come to live by. Care, dignity, presence. Serena hadn't wanted it named after her, so they chose her mother's maiden name instead, allowing the story to be about both roots and renewal. On Christmas Eve, the house was full of warmth. The scent of cinnamon and pine filled every room, and soft instrumental carols played from an old speaker in the kitchen. Jasper helped hang the last handmade ornament on their slightly crooked tree, a handprint in clay, painted unevenly in red and gold. There were no expensive gifts, no catered dinners, no photographers capturing a life curated for display. Instead, there was a small table set for three, mismatched plates, a fire crackling gently in the living room, and a kind of joy that couldn't be manufactured. After dinner, they sat by the fire, Jasper curled up between them, his eyes growing heavier with each passing minute. Ethan looked at Serena, her face glowing in the firelight, her fingers running gently through Jasper's hair. He didn't need to say it. Everything that needed to be spoken had already been shown in the way they moved through each day, together. Eventually, Serena stood and carried Jasper to his bed, tucking him in with the kind of tenderness that used to belong only to a mother. Ethan watched from the doorway, heart full and steady. When she returned to the living room, he took her hand and pulled her gently toward him, wrapping his arms around her in the silence. They danced slowly, without music, just the ticking of the old clock on the wall and the faint sound of wind outside. There was no ceremony, no proposal, no need. What they had was already deeper than a vow. They had chosen each other long before the world knew their names, not for who they had been, but for who they had become, together. Later that night, as snow fell quietly outside and the lights on the tree blinked gently in the dark, Ethan wrote something in his journal. He hadn't kept one in years, but now he found himself doing it often, just a few lines each night. This time he wrote, "We are not perfect. We are not whole in the way stories often demand. But we are here. We are still. And we are home." And with that, he closed the journal, kissed Serena's shoulder, and let the warmth of the room and the quiet of their shared life settle into his bones. He had once built a world out of success. Now he had built one out of love. And this time, it would last. Thank you for joining us on this journey of healing and unexpected love. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring tales. What did you find most meaningful in Ethan and Serena's journey? Let us know in the comments below.